The camera flashes exploded like fireworks against the crystal chandelier, each burst of light reflecting off the gold-rimmed glasses raised in perfect synchronization. Mrs. Han Soo-jin's 60th birthday celebration was Seoul's social event of the season. 300 guests, the city's elite, and every major media outlet capturing what should have been a moment of family triumph. Naomi Carter Han stood frozen in her red hanbok, the silk feeling heavier than armor against her skin. The traditional Korean dress had been her mother-in-law's choice, a test disguised as a gift. Around her, conversations flowed in rapid Korean, words she'd been studying for 2 years but still felt like swimming upstream against. And now, Mrs. Han's voice cut through the murmur, honey-sweet but sharp as a blade. A toast to family traditions that have sustained the Han legacy for generations. The soju glass appeared in Naomi's trembling fingers, passed directly from her mother-in-law's manicured hands. The elderly woman's smile was perfect for the cameras. Warm, embracing, the picture of acceptance. But her whisper, meant only for Naomi's ears, sliced through the facade like ice through silk. In this house, tradition speaks louder than blood. Naomi's breath caught. Around them, photographers jostled for the perfect angle of the happy family moment. Min-jae stood beside her, his jaw clenched so tightly she could see the muscle jumping beneath his perfectly groomed exterior. His hand found hers under the table, a secret squeeze of solidarity that no one else could see. "Smile, daughter-in-law," Mrs. Han commanded, her voice carrying just enough volume for the nearby guests to hear the endearment, while her eyes promised otherwise. The toast commenced. 300 glasses raised to the ceiling, catching the light like a constellation of judgment. Naomi lifted hers with everyone else, the weight of it feeling like lifting mountains. The soju burned her throat, but not as much as the knowledge that every camera flash was capturing her contained tears. Every smile was practiced deception. She had married for love. They were celebrating a lie. As the applause thundered around them, Mrs. Han leaned in one final time, her lips barely moving. "Some contracts have clauses that aren't written down, my dear. Remember that." The glass slipped from Naomi's fingers, shattering against the marble floor in a crystal explosion that somehow seemed louder than all the celebration around them. What's harder, being ignored or being celebrated falsely? If your marriage contract came with invisible clauses designed to erase who you are, would you still sign it? The morning after the birthday disaster, Naomi stood on the balcony of their penthouse apartment, 40 floors above Seoul's bustling streets. The city sprawled endlessly below, a maze of ancient temples nestled between glass towers, tradition and modernity locked in eternal dance. Just like her marriage. Her phone buzzed with notifications she didn't want to read. The party photos were already viral. Hantech CEO's beautiful wife steals the show, read one headline. Beautiful. They always mentioned that first, as if her worth could be measured in camera-friendly angles. "You barely slept." Min-jae's voice came from behind her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He'd been up since 5 a.m. She could tell from the way his hair was already perfectly styled, his shirt pressed to mathematical precision. Hard to sleep when you keep replaying your public humiliation. Naomi accepted the coffee, inhaling the familiar comfort of their morning ritual. "Your mother was sending a message last night. I just can't decide if it was for me or for everyone watching." Min-jae set his cup down harder than necessary. "She's protective of family image. It's not personal. Everything about this is personal." Naomi turned to face him fully. "When your mother whispers threats in my ear while smiling for photographers, when your board members ask if I'm settling in with that tone that really means, when are you leaving? When your sister looks at me like I'm a puzzle she can't solve, all of that is personal." The morning light caught the gold of her wedding ring, and for a moment, she remembered when he'd first slipped it on her finger. A small ceremony in New York, just the two of them, and a justice of the peace. Simple, real, before soul, before the weight of legacy and expectation. Grace is coming over this afternoon, Naomi continued, needing to fill the silence that was growing between them like a chasm. She wants to discuss something important. Min-jae's expression shifted, a flicker of something she couldn't read. About what? She wouldn't say over the phone. But you know Grace. She doesn't do social visits. The unspoken truth hung between them. Grace Park, investigative journalist and Naomi's only real friend in Seoul, didn't make house calls unless she'd uncovered something that required privacy. Something that couldn't be discussed over monitored phones or in public spaces, where conversations could be recorded. Min-jae's phone rang, the specific ringtone reserved for his mother. He glanced at Naomi apologetically, before answering in rapid Korean. She caught enough words to understand. Damage control, media narrative, and appropriate response. When he hung up, his shoulders had that familiar defeated slope. She wants to see us both, today, before Grace arrives. Naomi felt something cold settle in her stomach. The invitation that sounds optional never is. The Han family compound sat like a fortress in Gangnam, all traditional architecture and modern security systems. Naomi had been here dozens of times, but the imposing gates never felt less intimidating. Today, they felt like prison bars clicking shut behind them. Mrs. Han waited in the formal tea room, dressed in a simple but elegant hanbok that probably cost more than most people's cars. She had the particular stillness that powerful people cultivate, the kind that makes everyone else fidget while they remain perfectly composed. Naomi, dear. The greeting was warm enough for the household staff to hear, but her eyes remained arctic. Please sit. We have much to discuss. The tea service was already prepared, delicate porcelain that had been in the family for generations. Another test. Naomi had memorized the proper way to receive tea, the exact angle of her bow, the precise words of gratitude. 2 years of cultural tutoring distilled into 5 minutes of performance. The photographs from last evening are quite lovely, Mrs. Han began, pouring tea with practiced elegance. You photograph well, Naomi. Very striking. The pause before striking contained worlds of meaning. However, she continued, not looking up from her careful pouring, I've received several calls this morning. Concerns about presentation. Some felt that perhaps a more traditional approach to public appearances might be beneficial. Min-jae shifted beside Naomi. Mother, Naomi looked beautiful last night. Everyone said so. Beautiful, yes. But appropriate? Mrs. Han finally looked directly at Naomi. There are expectations, daughter-in-law. Standards that have been maintained for generations. The Han name carries weight in this country, and with that weight comes responsibility. Naomi felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the sensation of being measured against invisible standards she could never fully understand. I wore what you selected for me, Mrs. Han. I followed every protocol you outlined. Protocol, yes. But protocol without understanding is merely performance. The older woman's smile never wavered. True belonging requires something deeper, something that perhaps cannot be taught. The words hit like physical blows, each one carefully chosen for maximum impact while maintaining plausible deniability. If anyone asked later, Mrs. Han had simply been discussing cultural education. Nothing more. Mrs. Han, Naomi began, then stopped. She'd been about to defend herself, to explain her genuine efforts to understand and honor Korean culture. But something in the older woman's expression told her that no defense would be accepted, no effort acknowledged. I think what my mother is trying to say, Min-jae intervened, his voice tight with controlled frustration, is that there's always room for growth, for all of us. Mrs. Han's gaze shifted to her son, and for a moment, Naomi saw something flash between them, a conversation conducted entirely in glances and the subtle language of family power dynamics. "Of course, my son. Growth." She set down her teacup with a soft clink that sounded like a gavel falling. Which brings me to my main point. I've arranged for Naomi to have additional guidance, cultural immersion opportunities, extended ones. Naomi's blood turned cold. Extended how? There's a wonderful program. Traditional arts, language intensive, proper household management. 6 months in Andong, with the most respected cultural instructors in the country. Mrs. Han's smile widened. It would be such an honor for someone in your position. 6 months, away from Seoul, away from Minjae, away from any support system she'd managed to build. When exile is dressed as opportunity, how do you say no without seeming ungrateful? The ride back to their apartment passed in suffocating silence. Naomi stared out the window, watching Seoul blur past. A city that had never quite felt like home, and now felt more foreign than ever. 6 months in Andong. She'd researched it during Mrs. Han's elaborate explanation of the opportunity. A traditional city, beautiful and preserved, and completely isolated from everything that mattered to her life. "You can't seriously be considering this," she finally said when they reached their building's parking garage. Minjae turned off the engine but didn't move to get out. His hands remained on the steering wheel, knuckles white. "She's not giving us a choice, Naomi. This isn't a request. Everything's a choice. That's what you told me when you asked me to move here, remember? You said we'd face everything together. I meant it then. And now?" He turned to look at her, and she saw something she'd never seen before in his eyes. Defeat. Real, bone-deep defeat. "Now I understand things I didn't understand 2 years ago. The board has been vocal about concerns regarding the company's image. International partnerships are being questioned. Our stock has been fluctuating based on media coverage of our marriage." Naomi felt like she'd been punched. "Our marriage is affecting your business?" "Not our marriage. The perception of our marriage. The questions about whether I'm committed to Korean values, whether I can be trusted to maintain cultural integrity in business dealings." He rubbed his face tiredly. "Mother didn't arrange this program randomly. She's trying to protect us both. By sending me away for 6 months? How is that protection? By giving you the credentials that will satisfy the traditionalists, the cultural certification that will silence the critics." His voice was getting quieter, as if he was trying to convince himself as much as her. "When you come back, no one will be able to question your place in the family. And if I refuse?" The pause that followed told her everything she needed to know. "Mother has influence beyond just our family, Naomi. She sits on charity boards, cultural committees, social organizations that matter in this city. If she decides you're not suitable, it won't just affect our marriage. It'll affect everything you try to build here." Naomi felt tears threatening, but refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in the garage where even their most private moments felt exposed. "So I go to this program, learn to be the perfect Korean daughter-in-law, and come back to a marriage where I've proven I can be molded into whatever shape your family requires. That's not what this is. Then what is it, Minjae? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like a very expensive way to teach me to disappear." The elevator ride to their floor was silent. In the hallway, Naomi's phone buzzed with a text from Grace. "Running early. Need to talk. Urgent." Perfect timing, as always. Grace had a sixth sense for crisis moments. "She'll be here in an hour," Naomi told Minjae as they entered their apartment. "Whatever she found, she thinks it's important enough to risk coming here." Minjae loosened his tie. The first uncontrolled gesture she'd seen from him all day. "Naomi, About what my mother said. Don't. She held up a hand to stop him. Don't explain it away, or minimize it, or tell me she means well. I heard what she said. I understood exactly what she meant. She walked to their bedroom, needing space to breathe, to think. In the mirror, she caught sight of herself, still wearing the conservative dress she'd chosen for the family meeting, her hair styled in the sleek low bun that Mrs. Hahn preferred. She looked like she was playing dress-up in someone else's life. The red handbag from last night hung in the closet, still smelling faintly of the expensive perfume and underlying judgment from the party. She'd worn it to honor tradition, and it had become a costume in her own humiliation. Her reflection stared back, a woman caught between worlds, belonging fully to neither. When trying to honor someone else's culture means losing your own identity, where do you draw the line? Grace arrived like a storm system, all kinetic energy and barely contained urgency. She swept into their apartment with the particular intensity that meant she'd uncovered something big, something that couldn't wait for social niceties. We need to talk. All of us. She set her laptop bag down with the decisive thud that meant business. Min-jae, whatever you're thinking about doing, you need to hear this first. Naomi and Min-jae exchanged glances. Grace's investigative instincts were legendary. She could sense major life decisions from 3 blocks away. Grace, this isn't a good time, Min-jae began, but Grace was already pulling out her laptop. It's exactly the right time. Naomi, you mentioned your mother-in-law has been pushing cultural programs, right? Extended stays away from Seoul? How did you... Naomi stopped. Of course Grace knew. Information flowed to her like metal to a magnet. Because I've been tracking a pattern. Grace opened her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. 3 other foreign wives of prominent Korean businessmen in the past 5 years. All sent to cultural immersion programs. All returned, different, more compliant, less visible in their husbands' public lives. She turned the screen toward them. Photos, articles, timeline charts. The kind of meticulous research that had made Grace's reputation in investigative journalism. Meet Sarah Kim, married to a Samsung executive, sent to a traditional arts program in Jeonju for 8 months. When she returned, she'd given up her career in international law and became a full-time cultural liaison for Korean-American business relations. Very quiet, very traditional, very subdued. Another photo appeared. Anna Lee, married to a Hyundai heir. 6-month program in Gyeongju. Came back speaking perfect Korean, but somehow forgot how to speak up in English during board meetings where her husband needed support. Grace's eyes found Naomi's. Jennifer Choi, married to a media mogul. 4 months in Andong. Returned pregnant and immediately retired from public life to focus on family duties. The room went silent, except for the hum of the apartment's air circulation system. These programs, Grace continued, they're not just cultural education. They're designed to break down independent thinking, to create a specific type of wife that fits into a specific type of family structure. Traditional, deferential, invisible when necessary. Min-jae was staring at the screen, his face pale. You're suggesting my mother is part of some kind of conspiracy? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm presenting facts. Grace pulled up another document. The programs are funded through a network of traditional cultural foundations. Guess who sits on the boards of most of them? Naomi didn't need to guess. The name was already forming in her mind like a cold weight in her chest. Mrs. Han Soo-jin serves on the board of directors for 7 cultural education foundations across Korea. She has influence over curriculum, instructors, and program requirements. Grace's voice was steady, professional, devastating. She's not just sending you away, Naomi. She's sending you to be reprogrammed. The word hung in the air like smoke. Min-jae stood abruptly, began pacing to the window and back. This is... Mother wouldn't. She's traditional, yes, but she's not malicious. Isn't she? Grace's question was gentle but implacable. Naomi, tell him about last night. Tell him what she whispered to you during the toast. Naomi had kept those words locked away, trying to convince herself she'd misunderstood the tone, the implication. Now, in the harsh light of Grace's research, they felt like puzzle pieces clicking into place. She said tradition speaks louder than blood, and something about contracts having clauses that aren't written down. Min-jae stopped pacing. There's more, Grace said quietly. I found records of phone calls between your mother and several Hantek board members. Discussions about the foreign wife situation and its impact on company partnerships with traditional Korean firms. She pulled up call logs, meeting schedules, email fragments recovered from corporate servers. Your marriage isn't just under attack from family pressure, Min-jae. It's under systematic, coordinated pressure from business interests who see Naomi as a liability to Korean corporate culture. When your love becomes a business problem, who decides what's more valuable? That night, Naomi sat at their dining table with a piece of paper that felt heavier than lead. The apartment was quiet. Min-jae had gone for one of his long walks, the kind he took when he needed to think through impossible problems. She'd offered to go with him, but they both knew this was something he needed to process alone. Grace's evidence spread across her laptop screen like a dissection of her marriage. Every piece of data painted the same picture. She was not just unwelcome. She was actively being eliminated, methodically, professionally, with the kind of precision that made it look like choice rather than coercion. The red umbrella sat by the door where Min-jae had left it that morning. He'd grabbed it on his way out, some forecast of rain that hadn't materialized. It had been his first gift to her in Seoul, presented with that shy smile that had made her fall in love with him all over again in a new country. For protection, he'd said. Seoul rain can be unpredictable. She'd laughed then. Rain was rain. How different could it be? Now she understood. Everything in Seoul was different when you were the wrong kind of different. The blank paper stared back at her, demanding words she didn't know how to write. How do you explain that you're leaving? Not because you want to, but because staying means slowly disappearing until there's nothing left of who you used to be. Min-jae. By the time you read this, I'll be on a plane back to New York. Not because I don't love you. I do, more than I thought possible to love another person. But because love isn't enough when it requires one person to become invisible. Her hand trembled as she wrote. Each word felt like a small betrayal of the future they'd planned together. Your mother's program isn't education. Grace showed us the evidence. It's designed to break down who I am and rebuild me into someone who won't threaten the Han legacy. Someone who will smile quietly and speak softly and never, ever ask why tradition is more important than truth. I can't do that. Not because I don't respect Korean culture. I do. I've spent 2 years learning and trying and adapting. But there's a difference between respecting culture and erasing yourself to fit into someone else's definition of acceptable. The words came faster now, 2 years of suppressed frustration flowing onto the page. I know you love me. I know you're trying to protect both of us. But protection that requires me to disappear isn't protection. It's elimination with better marketing. The board members who think I'm bad for business. The traditionalists who think I'm tainting the family line. Your mother who thinks I'm a temporary problem that can be managed. They're all right about one thing. I don't fit into the life they want for you. But here's what they don't understand. You fell in love with someone who doesn't fit. Someone who asks questions and challenges assumptions, and believes that love means accepting each other's differences, not eliminating them. If you choose to stay in that world, I understand. The Han legacy is real, your responsibilities are real, and the pressure you're under is real. But I can't be the person who gets smaller and smaller until she disappears entirely, just so everyone else can be comfortable. She paused, the pen hovering over the paper. This was the hardest part. The ending that felt like ripping her heart in half. I love you enough to leave before we both become people we don't recognize. I love you enough to refuse to be the reason you have to choose between your family and your conscience every single day. Maybe someday, when you figured out who you are when you're not trying to be everyone else's definition of a good son, a good CEO, a good Korean man, maybe then we can try again, in a place where love doesn't require one of us to disappear. Keep the umbrella. Soul Rain really is unpredictable. Forever yours, Naomi. She folded the letter carefully, wrote his name on the outside in her best handwriting. The paper felt like it contained the weight of everything she was giving up. Not just him, but the future they'd dreamed of. The children they'd talked about having. The life they were supposed to build together. The apartment felt too quiet, too empty. She could hear the city beyond the windows. Millions of people going about their lives, unaware that hers was ending 40 floors above them. Her phone buzzed with a text from Min-jae. Coming home soon. We need to talk about what Grace found. Too late. The decision was made. The letter was written. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to let love destroy you both. Naomi's suitcase lay open on their bed like a wound, half filled with the strange archaeology of a life being dismantled. 2 years in Seoul condensed into one piece of luggage. What do you keep? What do you leave behind? The handbag from the birthday party, definitely leaving. The business cards from networking events where she'd smiled and bowed and tried to prove she belonged, leaving. The Korean language textbooks with her determined handwritten notes in the margins, somehow the hardest to abandon. Her gold necklace, her grandmother's necklace, caught the light from the bedside lamp. It had been her talisman through every difficult adjustment, every cultural misstep, every moment when she'd felt lost in translation. She fastened it around her neck. This, at least, would travel with her. The sound of Min-jae's key in the front door made her heart leap and break simultaneously. She heard him call her name, heard his footsteps approaching the bedroom. There was no hiding what she was doing. The open suitcase made her intentions clear as a billboard. Naomi. His voice was soft, wounded. Don't do this. She didn't turn around, couldn't bear to see his face. Grace gave us the truth, Min-jae. Your mother isn't trying to help me integrate. She's trying to eliminate the parts of me that don't fit her vision of a perfect daughter-in-law. We can fight this. Together. How? Your business partners are pressuring you to maintain traditional values. Your family is systematically planning to send me away for reprogramming. Your mother has more influence than both of us combined. She finally faced him, and the pain in his eyes nearly undid her resolve. What exactly are we going to fight with? With love. With commitment. With the promise we made to each other. Love isn't a weapon, Min-jae. It's beautiful and it's real, but it can't battle institutional power structures designed to eliminate people like me. He stepped closer, and she could smell his cologne. The same scent she'd been breathing in for 3 years, that had become synonymous with home and safety and belonging. People like you? Foreign wives who don't know their place. Women who ask questions instead of accepting answers. Daughters-in-law who can't be molded into invisible, decorative accessories to powerful men's lives. The words came out sharper than she'd intended, but they were true. Grace's research had shown her a pattern she couldn't unsee. Foreign wives transformed into cultural props, their individuality systematically dismantled until they became perfect Korean wives who happened to look different. Is that what you think I want? A decorative accessory? I think you want to love me and please your family and maintain your business relationships and honor Korean traditions all at the same time. I think you're a good man trying to solve an impossible equation. She zipped the suitcase closed with hands that shook slightly. But the only solution everyone else will accept requires me to disappear piece by piece until there's nothing left of who I was before I met you. Min-jae sat heavily on the edge of the bed, his perfect composure finally cracking. So you're just leaving? After everything we've built together? I'm leaving before everything we've built together destroys us both. She'd practiced this conversation in her head during the packing, but reality was messier, more painful. The distance between the bed and the door felt like an ocean. The letter explains everything better than I can right now, she said, nodding toward the folded paper on his nightstand. I need you to understand that I'm not running away from you. I'm running toward the possibility that maybe someday we can find a different way to be together, a way that doesn't require one of us to become someone else. Naomi, please. I love you too much to watch you choose between me and everything else that matters to you every single day for the rest of our lives. And I love myself too much to become smaller and quieter and more invisible until I forget who I used to be. She picked up her suitcase, the red umbrella, her purse. The weight of leaving felt impossible, but the weight of staying felt fatal. Don't come with me to the airport, she said, knowing he would try. Let me do this cleanly. The elevator door closing between them felt like the period at the end of a sentence neither of them wanted to write. Grace found her in the airport departure lounge at 6 a.m., clutching a coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Naomi's flight to New York didn't leave for another 3 hours, but she'd arrived early, needing the safety of being in transit. Not in Seoul anymore, but not home yet either. You look like hell, Grace said, settling into the seat beside her with characteristic directness. I feel like hell, but it's better than feeling like I'm disappearing. Grace studied her for a moment. That intense journalistic scrutiny that missed nothing. Min-jae doesn't know you're here, does he? I told him not to come to the airport. I meant it. And he listened? That doesn't sound like the man who flew to New York 6 times before convincing you to move here. Naomi almost smiled at the memory. Min-jae's determined courtship across continents. His refusal to accept that distance meant impossibility. He'd been so sure then that love could overcome any obstacle. Before Seoul, before family expectations, before business pressures. He's reading my letter right now, she said, learning that his wife is abandoning his marriage because she can't handle the pressure. Is that what you think you're doing? Isn't it? Grace was quiet for a long moment, watching the early morning travelers hurry past with their purposeful urgency. Can I tell you something I didn't mention yesterday? Something I found but wasn't sure you were ready to hear? Naomi tensed. More evidence of the conspiracy against foreign wives? Evidence of something else. Grace pulled out her phone, scrolled through photos until she found what she was looking for. I've been digging into Mrs. Hand's past, trying to understand why she's so threatened by you specifically. The photo on the screen was old, grainy, the kind of snapshot that belonged to a different era. A young Korean woman in a traditional hanbok stood beside a tall black man in a military uniform. They were holding hands, smiling at the camera with the kind of joy that was impossible to fake. Is that Mrs. Han Soo-jin, age 22, and Sergeant James Wright, U.S. Army, stationed in Seoul in 1987. Grace's voice was gentle but firm. They were engaged. Naomi stared at the photo, trying to reconcile the radiant young woman with the cold matriarch who had whispered threats at her birthday party. What happened? Family pressure? Social expectations? Sound familiar? Grace scrolled to the next image, a newspaper clipping in Korean. The engagement was broken when her father threatened to disown her. James was transferred back to the States. Mrs. Han married her current husband 6 months later, in what was described as an advantageous match for both families. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. She's not threatened by me because I'm foreign. She's threatened by me because I represent the choice she didn't make. The choice she wasn't allowed to make, Grace corrected. There's more. James Wright tried to contact her for years after he returned to America. Letters, phone calls, even a visit to Seoul in the early 90s. She never responded. Does Min-jae know? I doubt it. This was buried deep. Took me weeks to find the connection. Mrs. Han has spent 37 years creating a perfect traditional Korean life as penance for almost choosing love over duty. Naomi felt something shift inside her chest. Not quite sympathy, but understanding. The bitter whisper at the birthday party, the systematic campaign to eliminate foreign wives, the desperation to preserve traditional values. It wasn't just about maintaining cultural purity. It was about justifying a lifetime of sacrificing love for approval. She's destroying other women's choices because she can't live with her own, Naomi said slowly. And she's doing it with the particular cruelty of someone who knows exactly what she's taking away, because she gave up the same thing. A gate announcement echoed through the terminal. Something about boarding procedures, but Naomi's mind was elsewhere. Mrs. Han's cold precision wasn't just cultural conservatism. It was the methodical cruelty of someone forcing others to make the same sacrifice she'd made, to prove that her choice had been not just correct, but necessary. This doesn't change anything, Naomi said finally. Understanding why she's doing this doesn't make it less devastating. Maybe not. But it might change how Min-jae responds when he finds out. Grace's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen, then at Naomi. Speaking of Min-jae, some truths are too big to be contained by airport departure lounges and international flights. Min-jae found them in the departure lounge 90 minutes later, looking like he'd driven through Seoul traffic at dangerous speeds to get there. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, hair uncombed, shirt wrinkled, the kind of visible desperation that meant he'd read her letter and understood exactly what he was losing. "Don't get on that plane," he said without preamble, ignoring the curious glances from other travelers. "Not yet. Not until you hear what I have to say." Naomi's resolve wavered at the sight of him. 3 hours of airport limbo had given her too much time to second-guess her decision, to remember every reason she'd fallen in love with him in the first place. "Min-jae, we talked about this. We talked. I listened. Now you need to listen to me." He sat down across from her, leaving Grace diplomatically in the middle. "I called my mother after reading your letter. Told her the cultural program was off the table permanently. And she gave me an ultimatum. Choose between you and the family business." His smile was bitter. 48 hours to decide whether I want to be a husband or a Han legacy heir. Grace leaned forward. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I'd made my choice 3 years ago when I proposed to Naomi in Central Park. Everything since then has been me trying to convince myself I could have both." Naomi felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. "Min-jae, you can't just abandon everything you've built." "I'm not abandoning anything. I'm choosing what matters most." He reached across the space between them, not quite touching her hand, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his skin. "I've spent 2 years trying to fit our marriage into their expectations instead of demanding that their expectations adjust to our marriage. The business pressure, the board members, the traditional partnerships, those are real consequences," Naomi said. "You can't just ignore them." "I can't ignore them, but I don't have to be controlled by them either." Min-jae's voice carried a certainty she hadn't heard in months. "Grace, show her the photo you found." Grace glanced between them, then pulled out her phone. The image of young Mrs. Han and her American soldier filled the screen again, but seeing it with Min-jae changed everything. Naomi watched his face as he processed what he was seeing. Confusion, recognition, and finally, a kind of devastated understanding. "My mother," he said quietly. "She never told me about him." "James Wright," Grace supplied. They were engaged in 1987. Her family forced her to choose between him and social acceptance. And she chose acceptance. Min-jae studied the photo with the intensity of someone trying to decode his entire childhood. All those lectures about duty and tradition and family honor. She was talking to herself as much as to me. She spent 37 years convincing herself she made the right choice, Naomi said, making sure other women don't get the option she didn't take. But she did have the option. She just chose differently. Min-jae looked up from the phone, and Naomi saw something new in his eyes. Not just love, but resolve. She chose safety over risk, approval over authenticity, tradition over truth. I understand why, but I'm not making the same choice. The boarding announcement for Naomi's flight crackled over the terminal speakers. First call for passengers. "What are you saying?" Naomi asked. "I'm saying come home with me. Not to submit to more cultural programs or family pressure or business ultimatums. Come home so we can build something different. Something that doesn't require either of us to disappear." "And your mother's 48-hour ultimatum?" Min-jae's smile was the first genuine one she'd seen from him in weeks. "Let her make her choice. I've already made mine." Grace was watching them both with the particular satisfaction of someone who'd seen this resolution coming before they had. "There's something else you should know," she said. "I did some more digging after finding that photo. James Wright isn't ancient history." She pulled up another image, a more recent photo of an older black man in a business suit, standing in front of what looked like a university building. He's Dr. James Wright now, professor of international relations at Georgetown University, widowed 3 years ago. And according to his university bio, he spent significant time in Seoul in the 1980s, where he developed his expertise in Korean-American diplomatic relations. The implications hung in the air like electricity before a storm. "He never forgot her either," Naomi said softly. "Some stories don't end with the first goodbye." The elevator ride to the 42nd floor had never felt longer. Naomi stood between Min-jae and Grace, watching the floors tick by in digital silence, each number bringing them closer to a confrontation that felt inevitable and impossible in equal measure. "She knows we're coming," Min-jae said, checking his phone for the third time. "I told her we needed to have a family meeting, all of us." "Does she know about the photo?" Naomi asked. "Not yet, but she will." The elevator dinged softly as they reached their floor. The doors slid open to reveal the familiar hallway that led to their apartment, the life they'd built together, the space where they'd learned to love each other across cultures and languages and expectations. But today it felt different. Today it felt like walking toward a future instead of away from one. "Before we go in," Grace said, stopping them both in the hallway, "you need to understand what you're walking into. Mrs. Han isn't just going to accept this gracefully. She's built her entire identity around the choice she made 37 years ago. Confronting her with evidence that she chose wrong, that love was possible, that other women are choosing differently. It's going to feel like an attack on everything she believes about herself." "Good," Min-jae said with more steel in his voice than Naomi had heard in months. "Maybe it's time she questioned those beliefs. Maybe, but cornered animals are dangerous, even when they're your mother." They reached the apartment door. Min-jae paused with his key in the lock, turned to look at Naomi one final time. "Are you ready for this?" "No, but I'm tired of being ready for the wrong things." The apartment felt different when they entered, charged with the electricity of impending change. Mrs. Han sat in the formal living area, still wearing the elegant hanbok from earlier, but somehow diminished by it now, as if the traditional clothing had become a costume she was trapped inside. "You missed your flight," she observed without looking up from her tea service. "How unfortunate." "Mother, we need to talk." Min-jae took Naomi's hand, a deliberate gesture of unity that wasn't lost on anyone in the room. About the cultural program, about the board pressure, about the real reason you're so determined to change Naomi. Mrs. Han's composure never wavered, but something flickered behind her eyes. I'm determined to help her become the woman this family needs her to be. The woman you never got to be? Grace's voice was gentle but implacable. Or the woman you were forced to stop being. Now Mrs. Han looked up, her gaze sharp and dangerous. I beg your pardon? Grace set her phone on the coffee table, the photo of young Mrs. Han and James Wright facing up like evidence in a trial. Sergeant James Wright, U.S. Army, Seoul, 1987, engaged to Han Soo-jin for 8 months before family pressure ended the relationship. The silence that followed was profound. Mrs. Han stared at the photo as if it contained the power to rewrite history, her carefully maintained mask finally beginning to crack. How did you... She stopped, regrouped, rebuilt her defenses. That was a long time ago. Ancient history. Ancient history that's been shaping your decisions for 37 years, Min-jae said quietly. Ancient history that's been used to justify destroying other women's choices because you couldn't live with your own. I made the right choice. The words came out sharp, defensive. I chose family honor over personal desire. I chose stability over chaos. You chose fear over love, Naomi interrupted, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was saying. And you've spent 4 decades trying to prove that was the only possible choice by making sure no other woman in your sphere gets to choose differently. Mrs. Han stood abruptly, her teacup clattering against its saucer. You don't understand what was at stake? What I gave up to preserve this family's reputation, its position in society. What did you give up? Min-jae asked. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you gave up love and authenticity and the possibility of real happiness. And you've been trying to make everyone else give up the same things to justify that sacrifice. When the foundation of your entire life is built on a choice you can't admit was wrong, how do you rebuild without destroying everything? Mrs. Ian. Han moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Seoul, her back rigid with the kind of posture that comes from decades of holding unwelcome truths at bay. The city sprawled below them, millions of lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk, each one representing lives and choices and possibilities. You think you understand, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. You think love conquers all? That tradition is just an excuse for cruelty? That I destroyed my happiness out of some kind of perverse devotion to social expectations? Didn't you? Naomi asked gently. I was 22 years old. My father threatened to disown me, to remove our family from all social and business connections. James was being transferred back to America with no guarantee of return. I had no education, no independent means of support, no way to survive in either country without family backing. She turned from the window, and for the first time, Naomi saw her as something other than an adversary. A young woman who had faced an impossible choice with limited options. So I chose security. I chose the life that was offered to me over the life I dreamed of. And I built something good from that choice. Raised children, supported my husband's career, contributed to society in meaningful ways. Her voice strengthened. I don't regret that choice. But you've never forgiven yourself for it either, Min-jae said. And you've never stopped wondering what would have happened if you'd chosen differently. Mrs. Han's composure cracked visibly. Of course I wondered. Do you think I'm made of stone? Grace leaned forward. What if I told you it wasn't too late to find out? What do you mean? James Wright never married until he was 45. He spent 15 years traveling back and forth to Asia, specializing in Korean-American relations. His wife died 3 years ago. Cancer. He's retired now, but still active in academic and diplomatic circles. Mrs. Hahn went very still. Why are you telling me this? Because he's been wondering too. I reached out to him yesterday, told him I was researching Korean-American cultural exchange programs. He asked if I'd ever heard of a Han Soo-jin from Seoul. The room fell silent, except for the distant hum of city traffic 40 floors below. He remembers you, Grace continued quietly. All of it. The engagement, the family pressure, the letters he sent that went unanswered. He's never stopped wondering if you were happy, if you ever thought about the life you might have had together. Mrs. Han sank back into her chair, as if her legs could no longer support her. This is not appropriate. I'm a married woman, a widow with grown children. You're a woman who made a choice 37 years ago based on the options you had then, Naomi said. But you're not 22 anymore. You're not dependent on your father's approval or limited by 1987 social expectations. You have education, resources, independence, all the things that would have made a different choice possible back then. What are you suggesting? Min-jae moved closer to his mother, his voice gentle but firm. I'm suggesting that maybe it's time to stop punishing other women for having the choices you didn't think you had. And maybe it's time to consider that some of those choices might still be available to you. Mrs. Han looked at the photo again. Her younger self, beaming beside a man who had loved her enough to want to build a life across continents and cultures. He probably doesn't even remember what I looked like. He described you as the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, inside and out, Grace said. Those were his exact words. As if summoned by the conversation, Grace's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, then at Mrs. Han with barely concealed excitement. It's him, Dr. Wright. I asked him to call if he wanted to know more about you. Mrs. Han stared at the ringing phone as if it contained all the roads not taken, all the possibilities she'd buried under decades of dutiful tradition. Answer it, Min-jae said softly. After 37 years, you both deserve to know what might have been, and maybe what might still be. Sometimes the past calls back at exactly the moment when the future becomes possible again. 3 weeks later, Naomi stood in the bathroom of their Seoul apartment, staring at a small plastic stick that had just changed everything. Again. The morning sickness she'd attributed to stress, the exhaustion she'd blamed on emotional upheaval, the strange sensitivity to smells and textures that had started during those awful days when she'd been packing to leave. It all made perfect, terrifying sense now. 2 pink lines, clear as a verdict. She sank onto the edge of the bathtub, the test still clutched in her trembling fingers. Outside the bathroom door, she could hear Min-jae moving around the bedroom, getting ready for another day of restructuring his relationship with both his family and his business. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of change. Difficult conversations with the board, renegotiated contracts that removed traditional cultural requirements, and the surreal experience of watching his mother cautiously, tentatively, explore contact with a love she'd buried for nearly 4 decades. Dr. James Wright had flown to Seoul the previous week. Naomi had watched through their apartment window as Mrs. Han met him in the building's lobby. 2 people in their 60s, approaching each other with the careful wonder of teenagers who'd found their way back to an interrupted first dance. The conversation had lasted 4 hours. When Mrs. Han finally returned to her floor, she'd looked different, lighter somehow, as if she'd set down a weight she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. The cultural program has been canceled, she'd told Min-jae and Naomi that evening. All of them. I've resigned from the cultural foundation boards and dissolved the foreign wife integration initiatives. It had been an apology without explicitly being an apology. The closest thing to acknowledgement they were likely to get from a woman who'd spent decades perfecting the art of never admitting mistakes. But now, staring at the pregnancy test, Naomi realized they were about to enter entirely new territory. A baby changed everything. Again. It would be the ultimate test of whether the changes in their family dynamics were real or just temporary adjustments to immediate pressure. Naomi? Min-jae's voice came through the bathroom door. Are you all right? You've been in there for 20 minutes. She looked at herself in the mirror. An Afro-American woman about to become the mother of a biracial child in a Korean family that had spent the better part of a year trying to convince her she didn't belong. The irony was so complete it was almost funny. Almost. I'm fine, she called back, though she was anything but fine. She was terrified and exhilarated and completely unprepared for the conversation she was about to have. She opened the bathroom door to find Min-jae sitting on the edge of their bed, already dressed for the office, but looking at her with the kind of concentrated attention that meant he'd sensed something significant was happening. What's wrong? He asked immediately. Nothing's wrong. At least I don't think anything's wrong. But something is different. She held up the pregnancy test, the 2 pink lines still unmistakably clear. Min-jae stared at it for a long moment, as if his brain was processing information too big to immediately comprehend. Then he looked at her face, then back at the test, then at her face again. You're pregnant. I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby. We're going to have a baby. He stood up slowly, moved toward her with the careful movements of someone afraid that sudden motion might make this miraculous, terrifying reality disappear. How do you feel about this? He asked, his hands hovering near her shoulders as if he wasn't sure whether touching was appropriate. Scared, happy, overwhelmed, completely unprepared. She laughed, though it came out shaky. How do you feel about this? Like everything just changed again, right when I thought we'd figured out how to make everything work. When you're finally building the life you want, how do you prepare for the life you didn't know you needed? The Han family dining room had hosted many significant conversations over the years, but none quite like this one. Mrs. Han sat at the head of the mahogany table that had been in the family for 3 generations. Her posture as impeccable as always, but her expression softer than Naomi had ever seen it. Dr. James Wright sat beside her, a detail that would have been unthinkable just a month ago. His presence had shifted something fundamental in the family dynamics, though Naomi wasn't entirely sure what that would mean for the long term. Min-jae had requested this family meeting to share their news, and Naomi could feel his nervous energy radiating across the table. They'd agreed he should take the lead in the announcement, partly because his Korean was better suited for the cultural nuances, and partly because she still felt like she was walking on diplomatic eggshells despite the recent detente. Mother James, Min-jae began, using the first name that Dr. Wright had requested, rather than any formal title. Naomi and I have something important to share with you. Mrs. Han's eyes sharpened, with the particular attention that meant she was preparing for either wonderful news or terrible news, with no middle ground between the two. We're expecting a baby, Min-jae said simply. Due in about 7 months. The silence that followed felt like the entire apartment building holding its breath. It's us. Han's face went through a series of micro-expressions. Surprise, calculation, something that looked like joy, then concern, then back to joy. Decades of emotional control warring with the spontaneous reaction of a woman about to become a grandmother. A baby, she repeated, as if testing the words for their reality. A baby, Naomi confirmed, placing her hand instinctively on her still flat stomach. Your first grandchild. My first grandchild. Mrs. Han's voice carried a wonder that transformed her entire presence. A Han baby. Dr. Wright leaned forward slightly. Congratulations to both of you. This is wonderful news. But Mrs. Han was already moving, rising from her chair with the kind of purpose that had intimidated Naomi for 2 years. For a moment, Naomi tensed, expecting another lecture about cultural expectations or traditional child-rearing practices. Instead, Mrs. Han approached her with tears gathering in her eyes, the first time Naomi had ever seen her mother-in-law display unguarded emotion. "May I?" she asked softly, her hands hovering near Naomi's stomach. The gesture was so unexpected, so vulnerable, that Naomi could only nod. Mrs. Han's palm settled gently against her abdomen, and for a moment, the woman who had whispered threats at birthday parties became simply a grandmother-to-be, marveling at the miracle of new life. "This changes everything," Mrs. Han whispered, and Naomi wasn't sure if she was talking to the baby, to them, or to herself. Sometimes the future arrives in the form of 2 pink lines and changes every rule you thought was permanent. 2 months into the pregnancy, Naomi discovered that being pregnant in a Korean chaebol family came with its own unique set of challenges and unexpected benefits. Mrs. Han had transformed from antagonist to fierce protector, though her protection sometimes felt as overwhelming as her previous hostility. "You need to see Dr. Kim," Mrs. Han announced, arriving at their apartment with an armload of pregnancy books and what appeared to be a complete nutritional supplement pharmacy. "He's the best obstetrician in Seoul, specializes in high-profile families." "I already have a doctor, Mrs. Han. Dr. Park is wonderful." "Dr. Park is fine for regular pregnancies." "This is a Han baby, the first Han grandchild. There can be no compromises with the medical care." Naomi exchanged glances with Min-jae, who was trying not to smile at his mother's complete reversal, from wanting to eliminate Naomi to treating her like precious cargo. "Mother," Min-jae intervened gently, "Naomi is perfectly capable of choosing her own medical care." "Of course she is. I'm simply ensuring she has all the best options." Mrs. Han began arranging the supplements in neat rows on the kitchen counter. Prenatal vitamins, omega-3 specifically formulated for brain development, calcium supplements, iron. "Mrs. Han," Naomi interrupted, "this is very thoughtful, but... And I've made appointments with 3 different pediatricians so you can choose the one you prefer. Also, I've researched the best schools in Seoul for bilingual education. It's never too early to plan." Dr. Wright, who had been quietly observing this whirlwind of grandmotherly preparation, cleared his throat. "Soo-jin, perhaps we should let them breathe. The baby isn't due for 7 months. 7 months goes quickly when you're preparing for the most important event in 3 generations," Mrs. Han replied. But her voice was gentler when she spoke to him. The change in her entire demeanor when Dr. Wright was present was remarkable, as if his presence reminded her that life could include joy, as well as duty. "Actually," Naomi said, settling onto the couch with a cup of the pregnancy tea Mrs. Han had insisted she try, "there's something we want to discuss with both of you." Min-jae joined her, taking her hand in the gesture of unity that had become their signature. "We've been talking about the baby's cultural identity, how we want to raise them to understand and appreciate both sides of their heritage." Mrs. Han stopped organizing supplements and gave them her full attention. "We want our child to grow up Korean and American," Naomi continued, "to speak both languages, understand both cultures, feel at home in both worlds. But we also want them to know that they don't have to choose between those identities, that being mixed isn't being incomplete. We're hoping," Min-jae added, looking directly at his mother, "that our child will grow up in a family where difference is celebrated rather than eliminated, where being Korean doesn't mean rejecting American influences, and being American doesn't mean abandoning Korean traditions." Mrs. Han was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving between them and settling finally on Naomi's barely visible bump. "When I was young," she said slowly, "I thought there was only one way to be Korean. One proper way to honor tradition and family. I spent decades believing that anything different was dangerous, that mixing cultures would dilute both. She moved to the window, looking out at Seoul's skyline where ancient palaces sat surrounded by ultra-modern skyscrapers. But this city, our country, has always been a mixture. Korean and Chinese influences, Japanese occupation and resistance, American partnership and independence. We've never been purely one thing, despite what traditionalists like to believe. Dr. Wright joined her at the window. One of the things I loved about Korea when I was stationed here was exactly that mixture. The way old and new, traditional and modern, Eastern and Western ideas could coexist and create something entirely unique. Your child, Mrs. Han said, turning back to them, will be the future of what Korean families can become. Not less Korean because of their mixed heritage, but more Korean because they represent Korea's ability to embrace the world while maintaining its own identity. When tradition expands to include new possibilities, it doesn't lose its power. It gains new strength. 4 months into the pregnancy, the board meeting that would determine the future of Min Jae's position at Hantech arrived with all the drama and tension of a courtroom trial. Naomi sat in the executive conference room's observation area, her growing belly making her presence both visible and symbolic, the living proof that the company's CEO had chosen love over convention. The question before us, Chairman Park announced to the assembled board members, is whether Hantech's leadership reflects the traditional values that our business partners expect from Korean corporations. It was politely worded corporate warfare. Everyone in the room understood that they weren't really discussing leadership philosophy. They were deciding whether a CEO with a pregnant African-American wife was good for business. Min Jae stood at the head of the conference table, the presentation remote in his hand like a weapon. He'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, gathering data that would prove his marriage hadn't hurt the company, and developing strategies that would position Hantech as globally progressive rather than culturally compromised. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had nothing left to lose. "I'd like to present our international partnership growth over the past 2 years." The screen behind him filled with charts and graphs that painted an unmistakable picture. Hantech's global expansion had accelerated significantly since his marriage to Naomi. American companies, eager to work with a Korean firm led by someone who understood cross-cultural dynamics, had increased their partnerships by 47%. "Our marriage," Min Jae said, clicking to the next slide, "hasn't damaged our international relations. It's enhanced them. We're no longer seen as an exclusively Korean company trying to break into global markets. We're seen as a global company with strong Korean roots." Board member Kim raised her hand. "But what about our domestic partnerships? Traditional Korean firms that value cultural homogeneity?" "An excellent question." Min Jae clicked again, revealing another set of data. "We've maintained all our existing domestic partnerships and added 6 new ones. Korean companies that are also expanding globally appreciate working with leadership that understands international dynamics from personal experience." Naomi watched the faces around the room, seeing the exact moment when business pragmatism began to override cultural conservatism. The numbers were undeniable. Min Jae's marriage hadn't hurt Hantech. If anything, it had positioned them perfectly for the global marketplace of the 21st century. "Furthermore," Min Jae continued, "I'd like to address the elephant in the room. My wife and I are expecting a child, the next generation of Han leadership. This child will grow up truly bilingual, bicultural, with the kind of global perspective that will be essential for Korean businesses in the coming decades." Chairman Park leaned forward. "You're suggesting that your mixed heritage child will be an asset to the company?" "I'm suggesting that Korea's future success depends on our ability to compete globally while maintaining our cultural identity. My child will embody that balance from birth." The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of Seoul traffic 40 floors below. The world is changing, Min-jae said, setting down the remote and speaking directly to each board member in turn. Korean companies that cling to outdated notions of cultural purity will be left behind by competitors who understand that strength comes from diversity, not homogeneity. And if we vote to remove you as CEO? Board member Song asked quietly. Then you'll be removing the executive who increased company profits by 32% over 2 years, expanded our international presence into 4 new markets, and positioned Hantech as a leader in cross-cultural business innovation. Min-jae's smile was sharp as a blade. But more importantly, you'll be telling your shareholders that board decisions are based on personal prejudice rather than business performance. When you stop defending your choices and start demonstrating their value, the conversation changes entirely. The vote was closer than Naomi had hoped, but decisive enough to matter. 8-4 in favor of retaining Min-jae as CEO, with 2 abstentions. As the board members filed out of the conference room, some offering congratulations, others maintaining pointed silence, Naomi felt something shift in her understanding of their place in this complex cultural landscape. They hadn't won acceptance. That might take years or generations. But they had won the right to define success on their own terms, and that felt like revolution disguised as corporate governance. "How do you feel?" Min-jae asked as they rode the elevator down to the parking garage, his hand resting on her rounded belly that had become their shared symbol of hope and defiance. "Like we just survived something that was designed to destroy us," Naomi replied. "But also like we proved something important, to them and to ourselves." "What did we prove?" "That love doesn't have to be reasonable or convenient or culturally appropriate to be worth fighting for. That building a life together means building something new, not just fitting into something that already exists." The elevator opened onto the parking level, where Grace waited beside their car with the particular expression that meant she had news too big for phone calls. "How did it go?" she asked immediately. "We won," Min-jae said simply. 8-4. "Good, because I have something you're both going to want to hear." Grace pulled out her phone, scrolling to what looked like a video call interface. "Someone wants to congratulate you personally." The screen filled with the image of Dr. James Wright, but he wasn't calling from Seoul. Behind him, Naomi could see what looked like a hotel room with distinctly American decor. "Congratulations on the board vote," he said, his smile warm and genuine. "Soo-jin wanted to be there for the meeting, but she's a little busy right now." "Busy with what?" Min-jae asked. The camera shifted, revealing Mrs. Han in the background, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater that Naomi had never seen her wear. Comfortable clothes that made her look years younger and infinitely more relaxed. "We're in Washington, D.C., Dr. Wright explained. "Soo-jin wanted to see where I lived, where I worked. She's giving a guest lecture at Georgetown tomorrow about Korean cultural preservation in the modern era." Mrs. Han moved closer to the camera, and Naomi was struck by how different she looked. Not just the casual clothing, but something fundamental in her expression. The rigid control had been replaced by something that looked like peace. "Min-jae, Naomi," she said, "I wanted you to know that watching you fight for your marriage, for your right to build a family on your own terms, it gave me the courage to fight for something I thought I'd lost forever." "Mother, are you saying—" "I'm saying that sometimes it takes the next generation to show the previous generation what's possible. Your baby will grow up knowing that love doesn't require anyone to disappear, that families can honor tradition while creating new possibilities." Dr. Wright's arm came around Mrs. Han's shoulders, a gesture so natural, it was clear they'd been rebuilding their connection with remarkable speed. "We wanted to ask," he continued, "if you'd consider letting us be involved grandparents. Both of us. James has always wanted children, and I—" Mrs. Han's voice caught slightly. "I want to be the kind of grandmother who celebrates everything this child will be, not someone who tries to limit what they can become." Naomi felt tears threatening for what felt like the 100th time since becoming pregnant. Hormones, probably, but also the overwhelming emotion of watching impossible things become not just possible, but real. We would love that, she managed. All of it. When the previous generation learns to rewrite their stories, they give the next generation permission to write entirely new ones. And 6 months pregnant and glowing with the particular radiance that comes from winning battles you never expected to fight, Naomi stood in the nursery they'd created in what used to be Min-jae's home office. The room was a perfect blend of cultures, Korean traditional elements mixed with American practicality, soft colors that would work for any gender, and enough books in both languages to start a small library. The crib arrived this morning, Min-jae announced, wheeling in a box that looked far too complicated for what was supposed to be baby furniture. Mother sent it from DC. Apparently it's the same model that James's daughter used for her children. His daughter? Naomi settled into the rocking chair they'd chosen together. Another gift, this one from Grace, who had appointed herself the baby's unofficial aunt. Turns out James has 2 children from his marriage. Both grown, both excited about having a Korean step-grandmother and a new baby cousin. Min-jae began unpacking the crib components with the focused determination of a man who had conquered corporate boards and was now facing the mystery of assembly instructions. Our child is going to have the most internationally complicated family tree in Seoul. I like complicated, Naomi said, watching him sort screws and wooden pieces with engineering precision. Simple was never really an option for us anyway. Her phone buzzed with a text from Grace. Finished the article. Want to read it before it goes to print? Grace had been working on a feature story about changing family dynamics in Korean society, using their experience as a case study. The piece was scheduled to run in Seoul's most influential magazine, reaching exactly the audience that needed to hear about successful cross-cultural marriages in Korean elite society. Grace wants us to review her article, Naomi told Min-jae. Are you ready for that level of public attention? It was a fair question. The magazine feature would essentially announce their story to all of Seoul. The pregnancy, the family conflicts, the business challenges, and the ultimate triumph of choosing love over convention. There would be no going back to privacy once that article published. I think I am, Naomi said slowly. Not because I want attention, but because other women need to know it's possible. Other families need to see that tradition can evolve without being destroyed. Min-jae looked up from the crib assembly, a wooden rail in each hand. Even if it means our child grows up in the public eye, being pointed to as an example of successful cultural integration, our child is going to grow up being pointed to as something no matter what we do. Mixed-race children in Korean society don't get to be invisible. Naomi rested her hands on her belly, feeling the subtle movements that meant their daughter, they'd finally found out at the latest ultrasound, was awake and active. At least this way, they'll be pointed to as proof that different can be beautiful, that mixing cultures creates strength rather than confusion. Speaking of which, Min-jae set down the crib rails and pulled out his phone. We need to discuss names. Mother has been sending suggestions. James has been sending suggestions. Grace has been sending suggestions. I'm starting to think our daughter is going to need multiple names just to satisfy everyone who wants input. Naomi laughed. What kind of suggestions? Well, Mother wants something that honors Korean tradition but works internationally. James suggested names that sound good in both Korean and English. Grace wants something that makes a statement about cultural fusion. And what do you want? Min-jae moved closer to her chair, kneeling beside it so he could place his hands on either side of her belly. I want a name that tells her story before she's old enough to tell it herself. Something that says she's Korean and American, traditional and modern, loved by family that spans continents and cultures. Their daughter responded to her father's voice with a particularly vigorous kick that made them both laugh. I think she likes the sound of that, Naomi said. Complex identity and all. When you're creating something new, even the name becomes an act of revolution. The magazine article hit Soul Society like a cultural earthquake. Grace had written a masterpiece of investigative journalism, disguised as a human interest story. Love Across Cultures, How One Family is Redefining Korean Tradition, complete with photos of Naomi and Min-jae in their apartment, Mrs. Han and Dr. Wright in Washington, D.C., and a beautiful shot of the nursery that somehow captured everything hopeful about their unconventional family structure. The response was immediate and polarized. Half of Seoul thinks we're cultural pioneers, Min-jae reported, scrolling through social media reactions over breakfast. The other half thinks we're destroying the fabric of Korean society. What about the middle ground? Naomi asked, though she was learning that middle ground was rare when it came to challenging cultural norms. The middle ground seems to be wait and see how the child turns out. As if our daughter is some kind of social experiment, whose success or failure will determine whether love marriages between Koreans and foreigners should be encouraged or discouraged. Naomi felt the familiar surge of protective instinct that had been growing stronger as her pregnancy progressed. She's not an experiment. She's a person who deserves to be loved exactly as she is, not as proof of anyone else's theories about cultural integration. I know that. You know that. But Min-jae's phone rang, interrupting his response. He glanced at the screen and smiled. It's Mother, calling from D.C. He answered in Korean, the conversation rapid and animated. Naomi caught enough words to understand that Mrs. Han was excited about something, possibly related to the article's reception. She's been getting calls all morning, Min-jae translated as he hung up. Other Korean women married to Americans, Korean Americans who felt caught between cultures, even some traditional families who are dealing with their own cross-cultural marriage questions. Good calls or bad calls? Good calls. Women thanking her for speaking publicly about the challenges of balancing tradition with personal happiness. Families asking for advice about how to support mixed heritage grandchildren. A few Korean cultural organizations in the U.S. asking if she'd be interested in consulting on programs for bicultural families. Naomi felt something warm and proud settling in her chest. So your mother is becoming an advocate for the same kind of families she was trying to eliminate just 6 months ago? Apparently so. James says she's been asked to extend her stay in Washington to work with a Korean American cultural center on developing resources for international marriages. The irony was so complete it was almost poetic. Mrs. Han, who had spent decades trying to preserve Korean culture by keeping it separate from foreign influences, was now helping Korean culture adapt and grow by embracing those same influences. Naomi's phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something about the timing made her curious. Hello? Mrs. Han? This is Sarah Kim. I read the article about your family in Soul magazine. Sarah Kim. The name was familiar. Grace had mentioned her as one of the foreign wives who had been sent to cultural integration programs and returned different. I wanted to thank you, Sarah continued, her voice carrying emotion that had been suppressed for years, for showing that there was another way, that we didn't have to choose between being accepted and being ourselves. Sarah, Naomi said gently, how are you doing? Grace mentioned that you went through some difficult experiences. I did. I let them convince me that being a good Korean wife meant erasing everything American about myself. I gave up my career, my friendships, even my relationship with my own family in California. I became someone I didn't recognize. And now I'm remembering who I used to be. Your story, seeing that you fought back, that you refused to disappear. It's giving me permission to fight back too. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply refuse to become invisible. And 7.5 months pregnant, Naomi had reached the stage where simple actions like getting out of bed required strategic planning and considerable effort. But when Min-jae suggested they attend the opening of a new cultural center in Seoul, one designed to celebrate Korean-American partnerships in business and art, she agreed without hesitation. "This is important," she told him as they prepared for the evening event. "If we're going to be public examples of successful cross-cultural marriage, we need to show up for the community we're supposedly representing." The cultural center was beautiful, a restored traditional Korean building with modern additions that somehow managed to honor both architectural styles without compromising either. Korean and American flags hung side by side, and the evening's program promised performances that blended both traditions. What Naomi hadn't expected was to find Mrs. Han and Dr. Wright there, having flown in from Washington specifically for the opening. "Surprise," Mrs. Han said, embracing Naomi with the careful tenderness she'd developed since learning about the pregnancy. "We couldn't miss this. James is being honored tonight for his decades of work promoting Korean-American relations." Dr. Wright looked slightly embarrassed by the attention, but pleased to be in Seoul again. "It's surreal being back here under such different circumstances," he told Min-jae. "The last time I was in this city, I thought I'd lost everything that mattered to me. And now?" Min-jae asked. "Now I'm watching the woman I loved become the grandmother of my step-grandchild, in a Korea that's finally ready to embrace the kind of love we thought was impossible 37 years ago." The evening's program was a celebration of cultural fusion. Korean traditional music performed alongside American jazz, visual art that blended Eastern and Western techniques, poetry in both languages that explored themes of identity and belonging. Naomi found herself moved to tears more than once, though she blamed pregnancy hormones rather than admitting how deeply the performances affected her. But the most powerful moment came near the end of the evening, when the center's director invited families who represent the future of Korean-American relations to come forward for a group photograph. "Go," Grace urged from beside them. She'd attended as both friend and journalist, documenting the evening for another article. "All of you, this is your moment." They made their way to the front of the room, Min-jae supporting Naomi's growing bulk, Mrs. Han and Dr. Wright walking hand in hand like teenagers who'd finally gotten permission to be in love, even Grace joining them as the friend who had made much of this possible. As the photographer arranged them for the shot, Naomi felt the baby move vigorously, as if responding to the significance of the moment. In 2 weeks, their daughter would be born into this strange, wonderful, complicated family that had rebuilt itself around love rather than tradition, choice rather than obligation. "Say family," the photographer called out. But instead of the typical posed smile, Min-jae turned to Naomi and kissed her. Not the careful, appropriate kiss of a couple posing for cameras, but the real kiss of a man who had chosen love over everything else and had no regrets about that choice. The camera captured it. The kiss that said everything about who they were and who they chose to be. Surrounded by family that had learned to love without conditions, in front of a community that was finally ready to celebrate, rather than judge. The best photographs capture not just how people look, but who they've decided to become. At 39 weeks pregnant, Naomi woke up at 3 a.m. with contractions that felt different from the practice ones she'd been experiencing for weeks. These were purposeful, rhythmic, impossible to ignore. Their daughter had apparently decided that she was ready to meet the world. "Min-jae," she whispered, shaking his shoulder gently. "I think it's time." He went from sound asleep to completely alert in the space of a heartbeat, switching on the bedside lamp and reaching for his phone to time the contractions with the app they downloaded weeks ago. "How long have they been going on?" he asked, his voice carrying the controlled calm of someone trying not to panic. "About an hour. They're 5 minutes apart now." Okay, this is it." He was already moving, grabbing the hospital bag they'd packed and repacked 3 times, double-checking that they had everything on the list their doctor had provided. "Are you ready for this?" Naomi laughed, then stopped as another contraction hit. "I don't think anyone's ever really ready to become a parent, but we're as prepared as we can be." The drive to the hospital was surreal. Seoul's empty early morning streets, the city asleep while their lives were about to change forever. Min-jae held her hand between contractions, both of them maintaining the kind of focused calm that covers profound emotion. "Have you called your mother?" Naomi asked as they pulled into the hospital parking garage. "I texted her and James. They're on the first flight they can catch from Washington." Min-jae helped her out of the car, his movements careful and protective. "Grace is already on her way. Apparently she's been sleeping with her phone on high volume, waiting for this call." The next several hours blurred together in the particular way that major life events do. Time moving both too slowly and too quickly. Moments of intense focus alternating with periods where everything felt dreamlike and unreal. Mrs. Han and Dr. Wright arrived just as Naomi entered active labor, having taken a red-eye flight and gone straight from the airport to the hospital. Mrs. Han appeared in the doorway of the delivery room wearing yesterday's clothes and an expression of barely contained excitement. "How is she?" she asked Min-jae in rapid Korean. "Doing beautifully," he replied. "Another few hours, maybe." "I brought something," Mrs. Han said, pulling a small wrapped package from her purse. "For the baby, when she's ready." Inside the package was a traditional Korean baby blanket, silk embroidered with symbols for health, happiness, and prosperity. But what made Naomi's eyes fill with tears was the American flag embroidered alongside the Korean symbols, a deliberate inclusion that said everything about how much had changed in their family. "It's perfect," Naomi managed between contractions. She'll love knowing that her grandmother made sure she was welcomed by both sides of her heritage from her very first day. Grace arrived with coffee and flowers, and the particular energy that came from witnessing friends' major life moments. "I brought my camera," she announced. "If you want me to document anything. No pressure, but this is kind of historic. The first Han baby born into a completely rewritten family structure. Just maybe not during the actual delivery?" Min-jae suggested, and everyone laughed. At 2:47 p.m., after 12 hours of labor and a final hour of intense pushing, their daughter entered the world with a cry that sounded like she had opinions about the timing and circumstances of her arrival. "She's perfect," Dr. Kim announced, placing the baby on Naomi's chest. "Completely healthy, beautiful, and clearly ready to take on the world." Naomi looked down at her daughter, their daughter, and felt something click into place that she hadn't even realized was missing. The baby was beautiful in the way that newborns are, wrinkled and red and somehow both fragile and strong at the same time. Her eyes were dark like Min-jae's, but shaped like Naomi's, her hair black and thick, her skin a perfect blend of both parents that would probably darken as she grew. "Hello, Maya," Min-jae whispered, reaching out to touch his daughter's tiny hand. They'd finally chosen the name just weeks ago, Maya, which meant illusion in Sanskrit, but good mother in Korean, and worked perfectly in both English and Korean pronunciation. "Maya Han Carter," Naomi added, using the hyphenated surname they'd decided on. "Your family has been waiting to meet you. Sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin with a baby's first breath." 3 weeks later, Naomi sat in the nursery at 4 a.m., nursing Maya while Seoul slept around them. The city lights twinkled through the windows like earthbound stars, and the apartment was quiet, except for the soft sounds of feeding and the gentle background hum of urban life. Min-jae appeared in the doorway, hair disheveled from sleep, carrying 2 cups of tea, and wearing the expression of wonder that had become his default since Maya's birth. "How's she doing?" he whispered, settling into the chair beside the rocker. "Perfect. Hungry every 3 hours like clockwork." but perfect. Naomi shifted Maya to her shoulder for burping, marveling again at how something so small could fit so completely into their lives. Your mother called earlier. She and James are extending their stay in Washington for another month to work on that cultural center project, but they want to video call with Maya every day. And Grace finished her follow-up article about Maya's birth. The next generation. How one family's love story is changing Korean society. She's calling Maya Seoul's most famous newborn. Min-jae laughed softly. No pressure on our daughter to represent successful cultural integration or anything. I've been thinking about that, Naomi said, watching Maya's perfect little face as she settled back into sleep. About the pressure she might face growing up as the poster child for mixed families in Korea. Having second thoughts? Not second thoughts, just determination that she grows up knowing she's not responsible for proving anything to anyone. She's not a symbol or an experiment or a representative of anything except herself. Min-jae reached over to stroke Maya's cheek with one finger, his touch feather-light. She'll know. We'll make sure she knows that being our daughter means being loved exactly as she is, not as what she represents to other people. Even when those other people include magazine writers and cultural commentators and business partners who want to use our family as an example of successful integration. Especially then. Min-jae's voice carried the certainty that had gotten them through the board meetings and family confrontations and cultural challenges of the past year. Our job is to raise a daughter who knows she belongs everywhere she chooses to belong, not because she fits perfectly into any one category, but because she's confident enough in who she is to create her own space in the world. Maya made a small sound in her sleep. Not quite a cry, not quite a sigh, but something that sounded like contentment. The red umbrella is in her closet, Naomi said softly, nodding toward the corner where Min-jae's first gift to her in Seoul hung beside tiny clothes in every color. I want her to have it when she's older, as a reminder that protection comes from love, not from fitting in. And your grandmother's necklace. Naomi touched the gold chain at her throat, the talisman that had carried her through every difficult moment since moving to Seoul. She can have that too, when she's ready. As a reminder that strength comes from knowing who you are, not from becoming who others want you to be. Outside their window, Seoul was beginning to wake up. Early morning traffic, the distant sounds of a city starting another day. In a few hours, the apartment would fill with the normal chaos of new parent life. Diaper changes and feeding schedules, and the constant wonder of watching a tiny person grow and change. But for now, in the quiet darkness before dawn, they were just a family. Not a cultural experiment or a business case study or a symbol of changing Korean society. Just parents holding their daughter and marveling at the impossible, beautiful thing they'd created together. Not just Maya, but this entire new way of being family. I love you, Min-jae said quietly. The words meant for both of them, Naomi and Maya, his wife and his daughter, the two people who had taught him that love was always worth choosing, no matter what it cost. I love you too, Naomi replied. Both of you, all of us. This whole complicated, wonderful, impossible family we've built. Maya stirred in her arms, dark eyes opening briefly to look at her parents with the serious expression newborns sometimes wear, as if they're taking careful note of the world they've been born into. And in that look, Naomi saw the future, not perfect, not simple, but full of possibility and love, and the particular strength that comes from knowing exactly where you belong. 1 year later, Maya's first birthday party was exactly the kind of cultural fusion celebration that would have horrified Mrs. Han 2 years ago and perfectly represented everything she had learned to love about her expanded family. The Seoul apartment was decorated with Korean traditional elements alongside American birthday party staples. Colorful balloons and streamers mixed with handbook-clad dolls and traditional first birthday symbols. Naomi watched from the kitchen as Maya, now walking with the determined wobble of a 1-year-old, moved between her various grandparents and honorary family members. Mrs. Hahn, visiting from Washington where she and James had established a permanent residence, was teaching Maya to bow properly. Dr. Wright was reading her a bilingual children's book. Grace was documenting everything with her camera, having appointed herself the official family historian. She's going to grow up thinking this level of international attention is normal, Min-jae observed, joining Naomi with a cup of coffee and the expression of amused exhaustion that had become standard for parents of active toddlers. Maybe that's not a bad thing, Naomi replied. Growing up thinking that families come in all different configurations, that love transcends cultural boundaries, that being different is something to celebrate rather than hide. Through the window, Seoul sprawled in all directions, a city that had become home in ways Naomi never expected when she first arrived as Min-jae's nervous new wife. The Korea she lived in now was different from the one she'd encountered 2 years ago, not because the country had changed, but because she had learned to navigate it on her own terms, rather than trying to disappear into someone else's definition of acceptable. The magazine wants to do a follow-up story, she told Min-jae. 1 year later, how is Seoul's most famous mixed family doing? And? I said yes, but only if they focus on Maya as a person, not as a symbol. She's not growing up to prove that cross-cultural marriage works. She's growing up to be whoever she wants to be. Min-jae smiled, watching his daughter charm her way through a room full of adults who had learned to love without conditions. I think she's going to be just fine with that arrangement. Mrs. Hahn approached them. Maya balanced on her hip with the confidence of a grandmother who had discovered that love was more important than protocol. She said halabeoji to James earlier, she reported proudly, her first Korean word for grandfather. And yesterday she said book in perfect English. This child is going to be brilliantly bilingual. And brilliantly herself, Naomi added, taking Maya into her arms for the particular joy of feeling her daughter's solid weight and infectious energy. Maya looked up at her parents with bright, curious eyes. Min-jae's eyes in Naomi's face, already showing signs of the personality that would carry her confidently through a world that was learning to make room for people like her. In the distance, Seoul's ancient palaces stood surrounded by glass towers, tradition and modernity coexisting in the same skyline that had once seemed impossible to navigate. Just like their family, ancient Korean traditions and American individualism, Mrs. Han's hard-won wisdom, and Dr. Wright's patient love, Grace's fierce loyalty, and Maya's unlimited potential. All of it woven together into something new, something that honored the past while embracing the future, something that proved love really could change the world. One family, one choice, one brave decision at a time. The red umbrella still hung in Maya's closet, waiting for Seoul's unpredictable reign. Naomi's grandmother's necklace waited in a jewelry box, ready to pass strength from one generation to the next. And their daughter grew surrounded by proof that belonging wasn't something you had to earn by becoming smaller. It was something you created by refusing to let anyone make you disappear. Some contracts really do change everything. The best ones are written not in fine print, but in the daily choice to love without conditions, to build families that expand rather than exclude, and to raise children who know that being different isn't a problem to be solved. It's a gift to be celebrated.